All right, everyone, good morning. My name here is Joseph Banks, Assistant Director for Career Services, as well as the dedicated career coach for the College of Humanities and Social Sciences. And I wanted to start off by thanking everyone who's here today to join us for this Alumni Lunch Series, Digital Takeout, where we get to talk with several of different CHaSS alums and see a lot about their experiences and discuss the different opportunities that await many of our CHaSS students. So before we begin, I just want to let everyone know that they can use the chat feature to ask any questions, to say hello or communicate with the host directly, or if they have any specific questions, use the question and answer feature. We have London monitoring those, and we will be using those for our follow-up questions after the first panel discussion here. And then right now I'm going to turn the time over though to Andrea to help introduce our guest for today.
Thank you so much, Joe, and good morning, everyone. We apologize for a bit of a delay. We're having technical difficulties. As you can see, I'm on my phone today. So I am excited, though, about our guest, and apologize that I didn't get much chance to connect with him before we had to start. But we're so thrilled today to have Mike Rigby joining us. And let me tell you a little bit about Mike. Michael Rigby grew up in the town of Gatun in Panama. After attending high school there, he came to study at Utah State University, earning his bachelor's in history and secondary education with a minor in political science, as well as his master's in American studies. Mike has worked as a teacher and academic coach at Green Canyon and Skyview High Schools since 1998. He teaches courses on the American government, AP US government and politics, as well as USU concurrent enrollment history 1700 courses. He is married to Dr. Shannon Peterson, Utah State University Director of Global Programming, and they have 2 daughters. Mike is a second-generation Aggie whose mother studied education at USU. And Mike, we are thrilled to have you joining us today. And I am going to be turning the time back over to you to have you just very briefly tell us a little bit about your history, how you came to your current position, and remind us, how you chose your career path, what you'd like about your job, and how you stay up to date in your industry. Welcome.
Oh, Mike, really fast. I think you might still be on mute.
There we go. I'm in a family's home right now, so I'm struggling a little bit with the technology, but it's great to be here today. I always enjoy speaking with students, not just at the high school level, but all at the university level, especially those that are aspiring to become educators like myself. As far as my career in Cache Valley goes in education, I've been teaching in the Utah public school system now for 23 years. I spent 19 years at Skyview High School, where I started my career in Utah. And then for the last 4 years, I helped to open up a new high school, one of the 2 new high schools in Cache County, and that's Green Canyon High School. I like to say I followed the principal there, along with about half the staff at Skyview. As far as my background, Joseph, we could go to the next slide here. I was raised a military brat, meaning that my father that raised me was a career military man. So originally they were both, my parents are both from Utah. One is from the big city of Nephi in Juab County, and she's an Aggie. And then my father that raised me, he's from Sanpete County. He's from Ephraim, Utah, and he also attended Utah State. I was born in North Carolina, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. My father's career was in the special operations community. So we moved around a lot. And just even in my early elementary school years, I lived in North Carolina, Georgia, New Jersey, California. And then when I was in elementary school, I actually moved to the Panama Canal Zone, which is, in my opinion, one of the 2 best things that ever happened in my life. It was a fantastic place to grow up. And I always had an interest in history and politics, but that was the place that really sparked my passion for learning about our past, growing up literally next to one of the modern wonders of the world and one of the great achievements of the 20th century, but also literally living right next to one of the great failures. When the French tried to dig the Panama Canal, there were remnants all around. I mean, I could walk into the jungle near my house and see old French tombstones which was always pretty fascinating. I went to Department of Defense schools. I graduated from Cristobal High School at a whopping 50 people in my senior class. That was in a small town called Cristobal in the province of Colón on the Atlantic coast of Panama. And from there, I attended a Department of Defense college for 1 year to kind of give you an idea of the relative costs. I paid $300 to go to school there for a year. Certainly much different in your universe today. After that, I actually attended the University of Utah. And if you could just go to the next slide, Joseph. I attended the University of Utah and also was going to school mostly in the afternoons and evenings. And I really didn't feel like I was getting that college experience that I was looking for. And I'd spent some time in Logan when I'd come up in the summers and visited Utah and family members. And so I transferred to Utah State, and it was really the perfect fit for me. I was able to study history, as they mentioned, and you can see on the slide here. And before I finished my history degree, I minored in political science. I also studied anthropology and had some fantastic mentors in the anthropology department. I always had a hard time kind of narrowing down my focus. There's so many things that I'm interested in. I always said I have a little academic ADD or ADHD, just because there's so many things that I've always wanted to learn. I was able to find some great professors and mentors in the history, and also in the professors that taught folklore and American literature. And so I ended up doing a master's degree in American Studies. And I know sometimes prospective teachers have questions about, oh, should I go to graduate school first? What should I do when am I going to be overqualified, overeducated? And I know in my case, certainly having that graduate background and being able to do research, becoming a better critical thinker, a better reader, a better writer, a better speaker, benefited me a great deal. In turn, I also started to earn my secondary ed certificate. As far as my career, what I'll get to in just a minute. I left to actually teach overseas once I finished my master's degree. I've done a lot of traveling in my life, and having grown up overseas, I really wasn't ready to settle down and to start in the public school system. I was in my mid-20s, and there's still some things I wanted to do while I was single and young and energetic. And Joseph, if you go to the next slide, my first job actually out of Utah State, I worked at an international training center. I worked for Kia Motors, which is an automotive company. I'm sure many of you have seen their cars here in the United States. But I lived just outside of Seoul. I went from Logan to a city of 15 million people. And their international training center was a really nice fit for me because I was teaching. I knew I wanted to teach from a very young age, and I'll get to that in a minute too. But it was an opportunity to really be immersed in Korean culture. And I was going to go for a year, and I stayed for 4. That kind of gives you an idea of how much I like the Orient. And the job was really conducive to travel. They really spoiled me quite a bit, where I could work. I would work a 10-week program where we would bring students in from all over South Korea, some of the rising stars in management and design engineers. They worked for the automotive company and their steel company. And then I would get sometimes up to 2 months off, and I was being paid very well. And so, and the 2 months off, I would spend my time traveling throughout the Orient. So I got to visit China, Japan, Thailand, Malaysia, went to Hong Kong as well, toured all over South Korea. And it was really a great experience. It was during that time that I started dating and eventually married my wife, and she was finishing her PhD at Ohio State. So I taught in the Columbus public school system for a year. And then we moved back here so I could recertify, or I should say move back to Logan so I could recertify my teaching license. And I did something akin to like an internship because I'd already been teaching. And the place I just happened to end up doing that was Skyview. And before I had finished my internship, they offered me a job for the next year. Just really good timing for me. So I started there in 1998. And I did a little bit of athletic coaching. I like playing sports much more than I like coaching sports. I taught AP US history, AP US government. Skyview High School at the time didn't have an AP government program, and that's been really my bread and butter for most of my career. So I helped to start the AP government program there in 1999 and 2000. And that program continues there today. And of course, I brought that program over to Green Canyon. My first couple of years too, Utah State reached out and asked if I would teach their US History 1700 course, which I really also enjoy teaching. I was a newspaper advisor for a while, and that didn't work out because I tend to err on the side of liberty when it comes to what students want to print. I don't mind being a little controversial, but sometimes that didn't bode well. It started in Green Canyon. It's my fourth year there. And as Andrea mentioned at the beginning, I'm teaching history, government, and then AP classes in history 1700. Can you go to the next slide, Joseph? My passion, while I've been an educator, and if I have any, I certainly hope I might have a former student or two on here, but one of the things that my name is associated with is my time as an academic coach. And I've coached a program. I started at Skyview just about 20 years ago, and have continued that, and actually have a combined student team that has students from Green Canyon and Skyview. And I decided that I would do that and continue to coach that. It's a very rigorous program. It's very time consuming, as long as I could still have students from Skyview involved. And it's worked out really well that way. And the rules of the competition at the state and national level allow for teams to combine two schools if they don't have enough students. So we've been able to do that. But we've had a lot of success. We've produced 15 state champions in this program. We've had that each team is broken up into 6 particular units that deal with academic aspects of the Constitution, political philosophy, equality, justice, social justice, political justice, legal justice, our justice system. And 6 of our groups have gone on to be recognized as national champions. It's if you were to talk to my students and talk to my family, I've definitely been a Kool-Aid drinker when it comes to this program, and I think it offers students a transformative experience, the same kind of experience that I had with some of the great professors at Utah State. And one thing that I've come to learn about teaching and education is students want to be challenged. There's a great teacher that some of us may have heard of named Jaime Escalante that taught AP Calculus in inner city LA. And he was fond of saying, I've heard him speak on a couple of occasions in person, he's fond of saying that students will rise to the level of expectation. And I truly believe that is the case. So I've been very spoiled because I get to work with these students the entire year. We start in August, and if we compete at the national level, which we've done for the last 15 years, we practice, present, research all the way up until the very beginning of May. So I'm very fortunate compared to a lot of teachers, especially at the secondary level and the middle school and high school level, that I get to work with, considered probably the best and amongst the best and brightest students, not just in Cache County, but in the state. And it's been very rewarding for me in that I've developed some amazing relationships with these students. And it's something that I will continue to do, or I hope to do until I retire. It's a program that is quite challenging, and not many teachers in Utah do it. And that's actually one of the plans that I have as I get toward the end of my career. I'm trying to encourage more students to actually go into this program. And then Joseph, the last slide. They mentioned my family before. Fortunately, my daughters have my wife's brains and good looks. I was raised with all brothers, so raising girls has been to me just a tremendous experience. And I'm glad I have all girls. And my oldest there on the right, the redhead, she's a senior who's just killing it at Utah State. She's studying global communications and linguistics. My youngest on the left there, she's a junior at Westminster, and she's studying to be an environmental toxicologist. And then, of course, my wife, who works with international programs and has taught in the business school, has taught economics, and also teaches in the political science department from time to time. But I'm very fortunate to live in the community that I have. When I was at Utah State, I never knew I'd be back. I really had planned to have my career maybe take me overseas, maybe even work for Department of Defense schools, like my mother did, and some of my closest friends now are doing. But it just so happened I ended up in Cache Valley, and that was a great thing for me. But that's a little bit about myself.
Thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, so we're going to ask a few questions here, and I'm going to start us off with, you kind of covered a bit of it, but what would you say is probably like one of the most challenging thing about your profession, as well as what has been one of the most rewarding aspect of it?
I think, that challenging term this year is really relative within the last year because of the COVID dynamic. And here in the Cache County schools, we basically went back to school almost full time from the beginning. I decided this year to only teach half-time for the first 2 trimesters, and now I'm back full time the last trimesters for some personal reasons and family reasons. That's been very challenging because teachers now have to wear a lot of hats. And I know many teachers, especially along the Wasatch Front and all over the country, are having to teach not just in the classroom, but also teach online. And they've been given additional burdens and additional challenges. That's been tough relative to this year. Other challenges, it's, education is a bureaucracy. There's a great deal of red tape. From my own personal experience, I don't do really well with red tape. My principal is fond of calling me a maverick. I've never been very good at crossing the T's and dotting the I's, and I should be better. I should make better efforts at that. But there are a lot of expectations that are placed on educators when it comes to qualifications, when it comes to certifications. And sometimes I think there's an undue burden placed on educators when it comes to those bureaucratic requirements. And in many cases, a lot of those policies are being made by folks, I'm trying not to get too political here, but are made by folks that haven't spent any time or very limited time ever in a classroom, but they try to come up with these one size fits all. I've never had a student also ever tell me the best experience I ever had in high school was a standardized test. So I think sometimes we miss the ball a little bit there, but I also understand that there needs to be some justification and accountability. It's also challenging on a personal level, and this is something I often share with aspiring teachers. As I mentioned before, I get to work with these incredible students that they scare you because you're afraid that they're going to ask a question that you can't answer. And many times yearly, I'll tell them, I don't know the answer to that, but I'll get back to you. I think that's important to let students know that you don't have all the answers. And although some student or teachers can be pretty good at pretending sometimes, but it's being able to work with some of these gifted students is just an incredible experience. But the ones that I lay awake at night thinking about, and this is my personal challenge at the micro level, are the ones that I didn't reach. The students where school is not a priority, the students that have so many issues in their life that school is way down the ladder when it comes to consideration. And when those students slip between your fingers, and some of those students you lose, you don't connect with, and sometimes connecting with them is just getting them to show up to come to class. And while I do teach the advanced classes, I also teach mainstream government. And it's actually one of my favorite classes to teach because it is so dynamic with so many different styles of learning that go on in there. I would say that the thing that I'm left troubled by the most as an educator are those students that I'm not able to connect with. As far as the positive side of education, I could talk about that this entire podcast. I shouldn't say podcast, this entire meeting. I get to work with exceptional people. We take a little bit of every teacher we ever meet with us, not just as a student, but also as an educator. I work with some incredible, incredible educators that give so much more than they ever receive. The best takeaway for me, though, is the relationships I have with students. You'll have people tell you, oh, those students are so lucky to have you. And I don't view, my worldview doesn't work that way. My worldview is one that I get to have these young people in my lives, and I get to challenge them. I get to know them. To be quite honest, I spy on them a little bit to understand what makes them tick, and they enrich my life. And they have. I can truly say I love getting up every day and going to work. And I know a lot of people that don't. I know some teachers that don't. But the most rewarding thing is working with these incredible young folks and eventually living vicariously, I should say, through them, because they go on to do incredible things. I've been asked, why not maybe teach at the university level? I considered going on to get an educational doctorate. I just really like the high school group age. I really like the humility. I like the fact that you can engage with them on levels that sometimes you can't with university students.
Thank you so much, Mike. And as a former high school teacher myself, I can appreciate what you're saying about, the push and pull of both feeling like you lie awake worrying about challenges, but also finding those daily interactions with students incredibly rewarding. So thank you for sharing that. In the humanities and social sciences in our college, there are a lot of people outside of our college who sometimes think that humanities is sort of the one-way track, or that teaching is the default setting for humanities majors, particularly one might argue for history majors. And we obviously work hard to work against only seeing that as the one way to get there. But in your case, could you tell us, was teaching something you actively pursued initially? If so, can you tell us more about that? Or if not, how did you find your way into teaching and eventually sort of choose that as your path?
Yeah. By my case, what some people think, including my family, I'm a little strange. I knew when I was a junior in high school what I wanted to be. I spent maybe the next 8 to 10 years denying it. I had opportunities to work in the private sector and had an aptitude in that area, but I knew that wouldn't make me happy. But I knew when I was a junior in high school that I wanted to be a teacher, and there are different reasons for that. I had a couple incredible mentors in high school. I had an English teacher, and I will tell you this: I was not an exceptional high school student by any means, but I became a very good high school student toward the end of my high school career. But I had a teacher that literally changed my life. She was my AP World Literature teacher. And when I walked in that class, it was the best and brightest of the school. And like, I can remember them turning around and looking at me kind of like, what's this guy doing here? She pulled me aside one day, and not only had she introduced me to the Iliad, to Shakespeare, to Dante's Inferno, she made these things come alive for me. She tapped into a part of my heart and my brain that had never experienced this kind of thing. One of those moments where you walk out of the classroom and you're still thinking about what you just learned. And I had those experiences with some professors at USU. She pulled me aside one day and she told me basically 7 words that changed my life. And she told me that I was the brightest person in that class. And I'd never heard that before. And even if it wasn't true, I believed it. And it helped me to understand the power that an individual, a great mentor, can have in your life. And last year, I was fortunate enough, actually 2 years ago, to go to her 75th birthday party in Washington State. And I told her that story, with tears in my eyes, because she had changed my life in so many ways. Another reason I wanted to be a teacher, I had somewhat of a rough childhood, and I wanted to help students maybe through those similar experiences, maybe help students not make some of the same mistakes that I had made as a young person. but to be there for them in those tough times, to help them navigate, but to also understand their potential. And that's very empowering to do that, but it's also a lot of fun to do that on the way. So I knew very early on that I wanted to be an educator, although I did not come to education in Utah until I was 31 years old. And that's a little bit later in life, but I'd also taught for 5 years before that. You know, if I really went back in my own past, the first time I started teaching was probably in high school. And then when I was working, I trained lifeguards. I taught lifeguard classes. I worked as a lifeguard in high school and college. And so I've been doing it in one shape or another. It was just a matter of where I was going to land. And it just worked out that I landed in Cache Valley in the high school system there. And so I can say I've known. It's not something that happened recently. It wasn't something that I learned to love. It was just something I loved from the start.
Awesome. And I think this next question that we have kind of goes right into that. You know, we've got a lot of other students that are interested in teaching either directly after graduation or even, you know, some years down the line, like you're, so, you know, looking at your own experience as well as even some of your colleagues that you work with, what are the ways that there are to teach if you don't graduate with like an educator's license or certificate, and how challenging is it to achieve that after?
Yeah, there's actually an alternative license pathway for those that want to teach in Utah. And I think this has been one of the ways that our legislature, our local governments have tried to kind of, you know, stick their fingers in the holes in the dam, just because there are so many people that are leaving the profession, and COVID has added a new dynamic to that. I've watched many of my colleagues that I would consider master educators, amongst some of the best that I've ever seen, that have, you know, they've gotten to that retirement point and they're gone. But Utah is at that point where we are in crisis mode. I mean, and I don't use that word freely. I mean, we are at a point, especially if you look along the Wasatch Front, we need educators. But there are many factors that act upon that I think that make the profession not that enticing. You know, money is always an issue. Respect is an issue. Greater burdens that are placed on educators this year has certainly been an example of that, where it seems like a disproportionate amount of the burden has been placed on teachers. But if someone finishes and they decide that they want, you know, they get a degree in history, or a degree in political science, a degree in English, and they decide that they want to, that alternative pathway, you can go online and it tells you how to do it. I know when they first came out with the alternative pathway, a lot of us kind of old salty teachers many of us were outspoken against it, because we felt like it was a kind of a shake and bake version of get your teaching certificate. But I've actually kind of stepped back a little bit when it comes to the alternative pathway, because I've had, and I know, several real quality educators, some that I work with. One's a former student of mine that I tried to encourage to do it, and she's taken that pathway, and she is an exceptional teacher, Andrea Thompson, who teaches over at Skyview High School. So that is a way. I taught, of course, overseas without the qualification I'd be required. I met the visa requirements, and they were looking for someone, and I had some educational background. If you go to most high schools now where extracurricular activities take place, everything from debate to athletics to band, you'll see a lot of those positions that are filled by non-teachers, which is unfortunate, but that's part of the exodus as far as educators leaving the profession. So you'll have coaches, you'll have academic coaches, you'll have band leaders that don't teach at the school and don't have a teaching credential, but they're needed and they have those qualities so they can step in. What I always tell any aspiring teacher, if you're thinking about it, I'm not the gatekeeper. In no way am I the gatekeeper, and that's a personal choice based on free conscience. If that's a direction you want to take, by all means, give it a shot. I do take issue, and I can be kind of a snob when I hear people talking about how, well, I just teach because we need money for Christmas, or this is just an income that supplements our family. Now that's the financial reality. I get that. But I, being the snob that I am and understanding the importance of what we do, I think it's essential that you're there for more than the money, for more than a secondary income and benefits. You're there because you're passionate. And I think any aspiring teacher and any student teacher that's ever worked with me will tell you, I'll pull them aside, and I can be a little intimidating. I'll pull them aside and I'll ask them one key question. Do you like young people? I mean, it is a pivotal, it is a fundamental question that people that are thinking about teaching really need to consider. Do you like young people? Because if you do, the pedagogical stuff, the classroom management, the credits that you need, all the hoops that you jump through, it's doable. You can learn on the job, and when you teach, you become a better student yourself. I know a great educator, Margaret Obrey, who retired out at Mount Crest, said if you teach it, you own it. It takes a couple years to find your pace. It takes a couple years to find out if it is truly for you. But it all starts with that love for young people. And I think many of them, maybe not surprised, or maybe some of you would be surprised to find out that there are people in the profession, there are people that I've worked with that don't like young people. And I have to ask myself, why are you here? And I'm sure all of you have probably had teachers where, you've realized that they don't like young people. And I always tell my students, they're the smartest people in the building. They figure this stuff out long before the old hats like us do. They're the best and the brightest in the building. So I would encourage someone, if they're interested in teaching, to jump in the classroom. I mean, and you don't have to take a class to do that. I can leave my contact information. You're always welcome in my classroom. I tell everyone they're welcome in my classroom. If you want to see what it's like, kind of, controlled chaos some days, come on in and see if it's for you. And one thing I do like about the secondary ed program, along with the elementary ed program at USU now, there's a lot more practical experience. Because the only way you really truly learn how to truly learn how to become a teacher is to teach. So I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you there, but if you have that foundation, you can work the rest of it out. And if you're not sure, and that's probably what student teaching is about. That's what visiting a classroom is about. And I've had a number of my former students, and then some students that have been referred to me that are thinking about education. I tell them, hey, come spend a week in my classroom. And if you want, we'll team teach something so you can see what it's like. So anyone that's ever interested, I'm not hard to find. You can always reach out to me, and I'm more than happy to engage with you on that subject.
Well, Mike, thank you so much. We appreciate that offer, because I agree with you. You cannot really get a good sense for teaching until you actually do it. And you mentioned just a minute ago, that some days are controlled chaos. So can you tell us a little bit more about, that balance between being a good educator and needing to plan in advance and thinking about things like lesson planning and curriculum planning, but also reacting to the situation at hand and being dynamic on your feet? Can you talk a little bit about how you balance those two sides of the teaching equation?
Yeah, there's a fine balance here. Having done this for so long, everything I need to teach, I have. As far as tests and quizzes, and there's some fluidity there, and lesson plans, and people tend to be very preoccupied with lesson plans. And I'd like in my classroom to have some predictability. So there are clear expectations, and when students come in, and regardless of where they fall on the spectrum, we all learn in different ways. And you'll have some kids that have learning disabilities, and then you'll have some kids that are going to go to college for free in the same classroom. So that predictability, really understanding the dynamics of the people in your classroom, is very important too, because what works for one student isn't going to work for another So I try to present a variety of strategies and a variety of opportunities for students to learn. I'm a visual guy. So when we're learning about something, we're looking at something. I'm also, believe it or not, I'm talkative. So when we're learning about something, we're engaged. It's not just some robot up there, some old fat bald guy spewing information and you taking notes. I want you involved in the process. So there is predictability there, which matters. And that predictability for students, especially for students that struggle, is a good thing because they can feel safe. They can feel welcome. They look forward to that opportunity. The majority of the time, they may say, hey, yours the only class I care about. I mean, that's a feather in my cap. And, but the flip side of that, when it comes to balance, is sometimes we know that school and learning aren't synonymous. And I have no problem digressing. If we're talking about something interesting or a moment presents itself where you see that learning opportunity, and it's not part of what you plan for that day, but it is an opportunity for students to be engaged and to critically think and to discuss and to evaluate and to assess and even question their own thinking, I have no problem going off on that tangent. And I think students appreciate that. And I think it gives, especially if it's student directed, and I'm a bit more of a humanist when it comes to education. I like to see myself as more of a facilitator than a general, then I allow that opportunity, that organic opportunity to build and grow. And students, they love it. They like it because there is predictability, but they also know that, hey, we're going to learn something today. And maybe it's not in the structure of what we plan, but there's going to be an opportunity to learn something and engage with other students. And I also make sure that my students' opinions matter. I teach political science. So students will often ask me, well, where do you fall on the spectrum? Or, are you a Republican? Are you a Democrat? What are your thoughts on this particular issue? And I'll always tell them that, it doesn't matter. Most students could not tell you where I fall politically unless they follow me after they graduate on social media. I might throw something out there. But students don't know. And what I tell them, it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what you think. And I want to know what you think because that's important to me. And that's what we need to get to here. That's what we're trying to figure out is what you think, which adds another dynamic to the classroom. But it doesn't hurt to have the experience. It doesn't hurt to know how to deal with situations as they present themselves. I know a lot of teachers struggle with discipline. I just never have. I've never had discipline issues. And I don't think it's because I'm this big guy and maybe look a little intimidating or whatever, because I've seen guys like me get walked all over in the classroom. And then I've seen, 5'0", 60-year-old veteran teachers just have students eating out of their hands. So the best part is that when the bell rings, we're going to be doing something, that they're engaged, and we're going to be doing something. They're going to get their tax dollars worth. We're going to be doing something until that bell rings and we leave. So it is a fine balance, but that's something that comes with the art. There's truly an art to teaching, and that comes with experience. And you have to learn how to be flexible. And one thing I learned from great teachers, great mentors like Frances Titchener in the history department, who just, I still think about her to this day, and my daughter has her class. So I'm always asking my daughter, what'd you talk about today? Carol Loveland in the anthropology department, the late Carol Loveland, who is just a phenomenal professor. Barry Tolkien, the taught folklore, the late Barry Tolkien. Jack Sherding in the English department. They met me where I was. And that is so significant as an educator, that you meet students where they are, whether that's in a planned curriculum or whether that's in some type of dynamic where maybe you're not working on a quiz or a test, or you're not presenting information, but you're trying to understand them as a person. And I think meeting students where they are really helps to maintain that balance between planning and what happens organically in your classroom.
All right, thanks. So I noticed this is kind of looking in your education history and such. We noticed that you've also received your education administration license as well. Can you just tell us a little bit about that? What prompted you to earn that, and what opportunities does that open up for you right now as well as in the future?
Yeah. Should I tell you the number one thing I learned from that program first? I don't want to be an administrator. That's the number one thing I learned from that program. Second, I love to learn, and I wanted to see the other side of the profession. When those doors close, I learned some very interesting things when you're sitting around, because I had to do a lot of practical hours in that program. And there's a very different dynamic to being an administrator as compared to being an educator, being a teacher. And that dynamic, while it was interesting and I learned a lot, I didn't like it. But I finished what I start. And so I finished the program. I took some really cool administrative law classes. I really enjoyed that part of it. The budget and accounting stuff, the balance sheet stuff, not so much. Although it is interesting to see where the dollars go and what happens when you don't have the dollars. But I've got to be frank here too. I had a master's degree, and the way this is way down the list and why I did it. But on the pay scale, you can have a master's degree, you can move over another lane once you have a master's degree plus 30 hours. And so that gave me the 30 hours, and I got like a whopping, pay raise of $2,500 a year or something, which, it all counts. But one thing I did take away from it, and the opportunity that I would like to pursue, especially as I see the end of my career, maybe in the not so distant future, I'd like to be a peer coach. I don't know if people out there are familiar with what that is. It's more of a modern dynamic or a modern role in education. We've just started in the Cache County school system. A couple of school districts in Utah have had it for a while. Other districts throughout the country have had it for a couple decades. But a peer coach is a teacher that works to help teachers. And I have a real interest in working with teachers to hopefully to help to make their careers, make them better teachers, and to help them maybe through some of the struggles that they're having with students or some of the struggles that they're having with teaching. So I do see a future in peer coaching. Where that is, where that happens, and when that happens, I don't know. But that is something I would like to pursue. My first love is in the classroom with students. That will never change. Nothing's going to change that. A distant second, hopefully down the road, we'll be working with other teachers.
Mike, thank you for everything you've shared so far. And we've had a bunch of active listeners today because we've got some questions coming in for you.
Okay.
So the first question I'm going to start out with is, how has public education changed since you began teaching? What do prospective teachers need to be aware of as they consider a career in public education?
We have about 2 hours. A lot has changed from the perspective of a new teacher. Pay and benefits, like some of the retirement packages in the state of Utah, for example, have changed. I'm grandfathered in, but some of those things have changed. Some of the burdens or requirements that have been placed on teachers have changed, as far as recertifying, as far as what you have to learn on the job, whether it's through kind of an online district classroom, whether you're learning about technology, whether you're learning about suicide prevention. There have been a lot more requirements and a lot more expectations placed on educators, which sometimes can detract from the classroom. Not that those things aren't important, but certainly that has changed. I think one thing that I've seen as an outside observer when it comes to education, as an academic coach, who's someone who's very preoccupied with mentoring students and helping them achieve, hopefully, somewhat of that transformative experience that I like to talk about. I think that to some extent, school's been made a little bit easier. I think, and this is a societal thing, community, society, If you were to go to my high school and look at the amount of acres set aside for athletics, just the amount of property and resources that are set aside for sports. And I'm an athletic guy. I come from that background. It was very impactful in my life versus the amount of emphasis it's placed on academics. That's changed. And that's been difficult. I think maybe as a society over time, maybe we're placing a little less emphasis on critical thinking skills than we are on how someone might perform on a football field. I mean, you look at the highest paid state employees in Utah, they're not professors, they're not teachers, they're not administrators. Where is it that we are placing our priorities? And I think that those things have a place in our education, but I think that maybe we're focusing a little too much on some of these events that are more superficial. And maybe as a community, as a society, we need to focus a little bit more on working on critical thinking and challenging our students academically. But when it all comes down to it, I walk in my room, I close my door, and I teach. And that hasn't changed. My interaction with students hasn't changed. But I think some of the other things I have mentioned, certainly those changes have taken place.
That's great. Thank you. So our next one here is from Anthony Peacock. And they say, thanks, Mike, for joining us today. How did you originally get involved with the We the People program? And congratulations on all the success with that program that you and your students have had over the years.
Shout out to Dr. Peacock. He's a professor in the political science department. A lot of my students have gone on to study with him and have really enjoyed his classes, especially in constitutional law. He ends up getting a lot of our students. But, you know, during the Reagan administration, there was actually some bipartisan work that was done politically. And there were some people in organizations that were really concerned about low voter turnout rates. So some programs were started by an organization called the Center for Civic Education. And they wanted to get students more engaged in the political realm, in learning about our constitutional system, the underpinnings of our Constitution, the great philosophy, the antiquity, the history, the application of constitutional law, our role as citizens in the framework of the Constitution and our system of governance. And they created this We the People program, which is basically set up like a congressional committee hearing. And it's competitive. And as we know, young folks and myself, we like to compete. And so they structured this program whereby you compete at the congressional district level, you compete at the state level where students prepare presentations, and then they have to take follow-up questions from judges who are often judges and attorneys and professors. We've had state Supreme Court justices at the national level. So students have a prepared speech, and then they answer open questions without any notes for a significant period of time. Then they're scored on that. And I got involved with it about 20 years ago because of a great high school teacher that got me involved in their program, Margaret Obrey, who's since retired. And I fell in love with it. I went back to nationals the first year. I saw the 50 states in Washington, D.C. competing against each other. And, you know, it's like a nerd convention. And I say that with all sincerity because I love the nerdy side of it. And it really pushes these kids academically. And that's where it started. And I'll hopefully finish my career continuing to do that. And I'm trying to mentor some younger teachers to have them kind of take the reins once I'm gone to continue that legacy in that program.
That's great. So Fran Titchener says, Mike, it's great to see you. It's clear how much your life experiences shaped you as a teacher and how you made adjustments as you went along. What is your advice to new teachers who feel intimidated by their situation?
You're not alone. I'm still intimidated some days, but yeah, it can be intimidating. My biggest advice to new teachers, and you can see them, and it's like they're like deer in the headlights sometimes. Give yourself a chance. All right. You know, the doctor that graduates and walks into surgery, you know, for the first time, or the pilot that flies solo. I mean, we all have nerves. We all experience anxiety, but give yourself a chance, and you're not going to be perfect. And it's going to take years to hone your skills. And the biggest advice I give them is find your own voice. I've worked with these teachers and I'm like, man, I should emulate this, or I should do more of that. But ultimately, you have to discover and find out who you are as an educator and trust in that voice. But show up. If you show up, you're going to be successful, and don't be afraid to ask for help. When it comes to, especially some of us old hat teachers, don't be afraid to reach out and ask us for help, because a lot of us really enjoy doing that. That's not always the case with some senior teachers. They kind of want to be left alone, but the vast majority of educators I work with want to help those aspiring teachers.
Perfect. The next question from one of our attendees says, I see that you have had an incredibly diverse career. One of the worries I have about being a high school history teacher is being held down to one place or being limited on my opportunities. How can I broaden my opportunities as a teacher?
Well, from my own perspective, when I got married and had a family, my better half and I, we made sure that we didn't live beyond our means. And in doing that, we set some goals. We'd already traveled a lot. We set our goals to continue to travel. And because of my wife's career, her career was somewhat conducive to travel. And then, of course, I had the opportunity in the summers to travel, but I always, for the first 15 years of my career, I worked in the summers. So we found those opportunities, create those opportunities to do those things, to learn, to make ourselves more interesting people, and not just to learn information, but to learn about ourselves. I'm always fond of saying, when you travel somewhere, the first person you meet is yourself. And so we create those opportunities, but I wasn't asked to do We the People. I sought that opportunity. I wasn't asked to do AP government. I worked with great leadership and I sought those opportunities. I work with a nonprofit called the Close-Up Foundation. I wasn't asked to do that. I sought out those opportunities. But also, there's some great things you can take advantage of. And a lot of time I recommend to a lot of new or aspiring teachers or young teachers in the field, take a look at the DoDEA education system, the Department of Defense schools. That's where I went to school. And I have some friends that I went to high school with that are teaching in that system, and they've lived and taught all over the world. You can also look at some of these international education jobs, some of these great international baccalaureate schools that they have all over the world, if you want to travel and work at the same time. And you can let that history teacher know too. I know a lot of history teachers that have other careers, that they own businesses, they do consulting, they write, and you can kind of pursue and find what it is you want to pursue and find. And then, of course, a lot of teachers get involved in extracurricular activities that can dominate their time: coaching, academic coaching, working with student clubs. It's really the universe that you create. And if you're excited about working with young folks or excited about furthering your own education, there are a lot of opportunities.
I have a question here that kind of ties into that. Could you talk about living on a teacher's salary? Have you felt that you could comfortably provide for your family on a teacher's salary?
So on my end of the spectrum, I have a wife that works in academia. So we are both professionals. So in terms of our finances and living on my salary, doable. Starting teaching salaries have gotten better. That's one change, and I probably should have mentioned that change earlier, the change over time. They're making it more lucrative for new teachers. I know educators that live on a one teacher income. I mean, they live frugally, but they do it. And especially as you get years of experience, or also if they're working on, they have a side hustle, they're doing something on the side, it is possible to live and work on a teacher's salary. You can go to any school district and they'll have a salary schedule, and you can take a look at it and anticipate where you're going to be. Of course, if you have other factors weighing down on you, like student loans, I mean, that can be difficult. But then also there are other states that pay better than Utah. And I was told one time the biggest export in Utah are college graduates. And I think sometimes with education, that can be very true. A lot of folks, a lot of my colleagues have left the state to go to greener pastures financially, but it is possible. It is possible. And I remember before they increased starting teacher salaries, I heard of a couple instances where you had teachers that were single mothers. They were divorced, whatever the case may be. And their students qualified for free and reduced lunch in some states, and or single fathers. And that's unfortunate. But I believe we're at that tipping point where, because of this exodus we're seeing, but also because a lot of our best and brightest don't want to teach. They look at those obstacles and those challenges. They're going to have to make it more lucrative. And one thing to keep in mind too, something like 95% of our students in Utah go to public schools. The private school business isn't really going anywhere in this state, especially with large families, and especially when you look at tuition bills. Even with vouchers, if we made school vouchers available, it's not unusual for me to teach families that have 4, 6, 8 kids, and if they're writing tuition checks for those kids, it becomes much less attractive. I see the public school system being here and being strong for decades to come in our state.
I've got one last question for you.
Sure.
How do you show your students that you care without overstepping any boundaries?
There's a balance there as well. I talked about meeting students where they are. And you can tell students that you care about them, but you have to prove it. And it's in the little actions. And I'll tell you, I really went through kind of a paradigm shift in my educational career. And I remember kind of having this epiphany about 15 years ago, where I came from as a teacher, what motivated me, what really drove me as an educator. And a lot of that was based on achievement. Help these kids achieve, help them to, look at your AP scores and really challenge these kids. But that change that I had, I really, not to sound too dramatic, I had this real epiphany, and I teach now more so from a place of compassion. It's what drives me, it's what motivates me, and I just took little steps, and I could see not just changes in my relationships with students, but I could also see changes in myself. But you have to maintain that professional decorum. And I've worked with educators that haven't. We had more time, I could tell you stories where those educators have crossed the line and they've defied that trust, which I find despicable. It's reprehensible, but it happens. It happens in any circle, professional circle. But the ramifications, of course, in my professional circle can be very significant. So it's those little acts of kindness where you can gain trust and have relationships with these students. And I'll be honest with you, I mentioned this before, I spy on my students a little bit. I listen to what makes them tick. And then I find that opportunity to engage with them. My door is open. I mean, we have this little thing at our school called Pack Hour, where you can come in and do remediation or just hang out. And most teachers do it for a half hour. I'm there the whole hour. I'm always there early before school. I try to make myself available, and I listen. And through that compassion, I try to help as much as possible. Not just as a teacher, you're a parent, you're a counselor, you're an advisor of sorts. You have to wear a lot of hats with these kids. And through those actions, kids know. And I'll say it again, they're the smartest people in the building. They know the teachers that care.
Well, Mike, I just want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day here. I mean, I really do wish we had those couple of hours or so extra so that we could just hear the rest of the stories or hear the rest of the, your thoughts and experiences on things. But thank you so much for just being with us today and being able to share a little bit more about what it's like being a teacher and everything.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. It's a great opportunity. Hopefully I didn't embarrass my daughter and my wife too much that are watching. And if I have any former students that are out there, and certainly the professors that I had, I know Dr. Titchener was on here today. Thank you so much because you've had such a great impact on my life. I noticed a couple people would like my contact info. Is there any way that you can put that in the chat?
Let's see.
Or I can just say it.
We could, if you say it, I think we can type it in there too.
Yeah.
And Mike, I'll also say that students are welcome to reach out to me or Joseph, and we can forward your contact information to them. But we so appreciate your willingness to connect with students or open your classroom to students. And we thank you for all that you do to inspire students to go on to study the humanities and the social sciences, as well as sharing your expertise with us today on what is your spring break. I do want to let our very engaged audience, and thank you for being such a wonderful audience today and having lots of questions. It demonstrates that this is really an important topic. And as we said, we could probably spend another hour talking about it. But for now, you'll have to wait until fall of 2021 to continue these conversations. But we appreciate everyone who has participated in the digital takeout this semester. But this event concludes our programming for the spring semester of 2021. And Mike, thank you again for just helping us and on a really high note. We so appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. And those that are listening, my email is simple. It's just mike.rigby.sv, like Skyview. I was there too long. I'm not going to change it. mike.rigby.sv@gmail.com. And feel free to reach out. And you can just find me on the Green Canyon webpage too.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, Joe and London, my co-hosts, for helping to soldier through what were some technical difficulties today. We appreciate everyone's patience, and we wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, everyone.